Okay, so we're starting to get fewer people flooding into the room, so we're going to kick off. My name is Anya Ranganathan to everybody that's in the room, and I am the co-chair of Duke Alums Engage, which is an organization affiliated with the Alumni Network that really looks to connect folks in the New York City region with opportunities to make an impact in the community, whether that's through volunteering, through philanthropy, through other forms of civic participation, and also through educational opportunities like the event that we're putting on tonight. This event, No Longer Hopeless About Homelessness, is a panel that we've been working on for a long time, and it's really taken on a new level of importance given the fact that we're in a global pandemic that's exacerbated a lot of the socioeconomic inequality that has always been visible in the New York City metro area. And so we're really enthusiastic to bring together multiple individuals that have expertise on homelessness as well as food insecurity and sort of the intersection between these two problems in the New York City metro area and where they don't overlap as much in order to dispel myths about a really important issue that impacts our community. Just a couple of notes about the event. We had you fill out an entry poll when you came in, and essentially, I'm looking at the results, and we see that the vast majority of folks that came to this event today were looking to learn more about homelessness and find specific ways to help, which this panel is going to provide a lot of actionable strategies on how you can get involved in the issue. We will have breakout sessions at the end of the panel so that we can all get to know each other on a more personal level. In this Zoom era, the big group meetings can sometimes feel impersonal, so we want to make sure that you come away from the event having connected with somebody in our Duke New York community. And just a reminder, during the panel portion of the event, we would like to make sure that all participants are muted with their videos hidden until we do begin those breakout sessions. Throughout the event, we do want to encourage you to reflect and participate using the chat. So feel free to submit questions throughout the event, as well as just reflect on different things that the panelists are saying. We really want this event to start a conversation. And so do feel free to engage in that way. We also do want to let you know that this event is being recorded in the event that you're not able to stay the entire time. So you will be able to see the rest of it. And we're also going to be releasing a resource list of different opportunities that we discuss to make a difference in organizations that are fighting homelessness and food insecurity following the event. And it'll be really wonderful if folks are sharing different resources, either organizations that they've heard of or ones that they've volunteered with throughout the event, so that we can aggregate all of these and send them out at the end. So now I'd like to pass over the virtual mic to Michael Harrison, Duke class of 2001, and the president of the Alumni Association, who will chat a bit more about the panelists on behalf of the Duke Alumni Association.
Great, thank you, Anya. Good evening. As previously stated, my name is Michael Harrison. I am a proud member of the class of 2001, DAA president, and a member of the Duke University Board of Trustees. On behalf of the DAA board, I'd like to welcome each of you to the first ever virtual Duke Alums Engage event. Although we wish such a meaningful event could be in person, we are thankful that each of you have joined us this evening, as we know tonight's discussion will be enlightening, powerful, and impactful. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to remind everyone that bios for our panelists, as well as our moderator, will be shared following tonight's event. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening. Reverend Cassandra Perry brings a wealth of experience in this capacity, and we are excited to have her joining us. Cassandra is the associate pastor at the Williams Institutional CME Church. She's a scholar, who is affiliated with many academies and societies. She has been an active participant in History of the World Christian Movement consultations, and in 2013 was appointed a research fellow in world Christianity at the New York Theological Seminary, where she is an adjunct professor. At Duke, Cassandra was an A.B. Duke scholar who studied in Spain and at the University of Oxford in England. After her time in Durham, she earned an MBA and later a Master's of Divinity. She should be a spokeswoman for Duke's Forever Learning programs, as she is currently a PhD student. Forever Learning, indeed. Cassandra is a board member who serves on the New York State Neighborhood Preservation Corporation Board, an organization that is committed to revitalizing housing, and the board, and the board of helpNYC, a peer-driven initiative that educates, advocates, and provides services to those in need. After working in the corporate world, she spent a decade working with nonprofit aid service organizations in Harlem. She is currently the executive director of the 163rd Street Improvement Council, which provides housing and services to those in need. Pastor, scholar, professor, Dukey, student, board member, executive director, and tonight we add moderator to her list of titles. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Cassandra Perry.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Michael, for that illustrious introduction. Won't you join me as we welcome the rest of the panel here? Their bios will be made available later, so I won't go into their biographical information, but we have with us tonight Kristy Fils-Aime, who is the Associate Director of Clinical Services at the Bowery Mission. We have Charlee Newman, who is the founder of Rise of Broken Women. We have Catarina Rivera, who is the Senior Manager of Network Capacity at City Harvest. We have Siener, a Professor of Urban Studies at Barnard. And last but not least, we have Teta, who is the Assistant Commissioner of Adult Services at the New York City Department of Homeless Services. Quite an impressive group here to discuss homelessness in New York City. As we start, I'd like to throw out a very preliminary question to Catarina, which is that hunger and homelessness are often conflated. The issues are pretty closely related, but could you possibly explain the distinctions for the audience? What are the key drivers of food insecurity, particularly in the context of the New York metropolitan area? Catarina?
Yes, thank you for having me and for bringing this topic to light. It's very true that hunger and homelessness are often conflated. People often associate them completely with each other, and they are intertwined, with many of our homeless neighbors relying on soup kitchens and food pantries. However, many people do not realize that vast amounts of the food insecure are working families and seniors who are living on fixed incomes. This encompasses the majority of the people who City Harvest serves. Even before the pandemic, 2.5 million working age New Yorkers were struggling to make ends meet, meaning many of our neighbors had to choose between things like paying rent and buying groceries. Unlike fixed expenses like rent and transportation, your grocery budget is flexible. It's an elastic expense. So it can be cut back on when families need to stretch their dollars to afford their other basic needs. So this is a reason that many families have challenges with food insecurity. The consequences of not having flexibility with other expenses as rent rises means that families end up food insecure. And we all know that the city is facing rising rent, and historically, many people have been pushed out of communities. Now, due to COVID-19, which has been a huge crisis, the city's economy is devastated, and the number of New Yorkers that are experiencing food insecurity is expected to surge nearly 40%, and as much as 50% among children. We know that many more New Yorkers many of whom have never before had to rely on emergency food, will be turning to City Harvest for help in the coming weeks and months. And we really do our work through our network of food pantries and soup kitchens across the city. And they have been working very hard since the pandemic hit.
Thank you for that response. I noted that you mentioned that among the homeless, this phenomenon of the people that are working homeless. And so I'd like to shift gears a little bit and ask a question of Cindy Teta, who is the Assistant Commissioner of Adult Services at the New York City Department of Homeless Services. Just by looking at your title, Cindy, the fact that you're the Assistant Commissioner of Adult Services sort of begs the question, are services for homeless people offered to people other than adults? So I would ask you, could you tell us a bit about the demographics of homelessness in New York City? Are there more homeless children than adults? What is the percentage of children to adults? What is the percentage of families to single people, and so on? Cindy Teta, could you enlighten us, please?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. Unfortunately, there are a lot of homeless individuals in New York City. That includes single adults, adult families, families with children, and street homeless as well. Last night, over 54,000 single individuals, including children, slept in shelter last night. Of that, over 17,891 approximately were single adults, which is the area that I work with more closely. With families with children, we had over 10,000 families and about 31,000 individuals in terms of adults, and 18,000 children under the age of 18 slept in shelter. Although I am currently working exclusively with single adults, my career has led me to start off with families with children and adult families. New York City Department of Homeless Services services all of these populations, and we do our very best to help our fellow New Yorkers get back on their feet and get them into viable permanent housing options for them where they can sustain themselves.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. This issue of homelessness is a tremendous one to get one's hands around, because as you've noted, it doesn't impact just one particular group. We can see people in our daily lives and think that they go home to their apartments and really they're sleeping in their cars or they're sleeping in shelters. This is a general question that I'll throw out to everyone, but what can the average New Yorker do to help? Are we to give money to people who are asking? I know that people have lots of issues about that, but is giving money to individuals a viable method of alleviating homelessness? If not, I think that we'll come away from this session with a list of organizations. But what can we do? We pass homeless people in the streets, our hearts are moved, but we don't know what to do. I'm going to open this up to the panel. Anyone, everyone, please feel free to jump in.
Cassandra, if I can start. So yes, it's heartbreaking, especially to see homeless New Yorkers on the streets. One thing I would recommend, if you see people on the street, to call 311. There's actually even an app that you can download onto your phones, and to inform us where there may be a homeless person, a family sleeping in a car if you have observed it, in an abandoned building, so on and so forth, so that we can get our streets and outreach colleagues out to assess the situation. To be very transparent, a lot of times individuals on the street don't want to come in for whatever reason. And our streets colleagues work with these clients really, really tremendously to try and help them to understand the benefits of coming inside and what services we can provide for them. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes repetitive visits and engagement strategies to kind of bring those people in. But I think one of the bigger things, as I mentioned, is to call 311. I personally don't think it's best to issue money on the streets to individuals. I think there are plenty of organizations that you've alluded to that can be donated to, and in turn get those to the right organizations to help individuals more collectively. You know, I've, even for myself, sometimes I just might give food or, you know, purchase an item, but that's me personally. I think everyone has their own other level of comfort in what they feel they would like to do and how they should do it. But if I can't stress it enough, please call 311 so we can engage everybody and get them in. It's getting colder outside too. We want to make sure that everybody is safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you. Do our other panelists have questions, have responses to that issue? Because if you don't, I'm actually going to sort of piggyback on that. I was not aware, I work in homelessness and was not aware of 311. And I think part of that is because New York City is big and booming and has lots of resources. It's a very expensive city to live in. It's very diverse. As I'm sure that we all know, there's lots of policies and procedures that impact our ability to even function in this town. So, Christian, how would you say that the infrastructure of New York City, in however you'd like to define that infrastructure, how has that impacted homelessness? I would ask that you consider in your response specifically policies and how policies have impacted homelessness. Have they exacerbated it? Have they alleviated it? Can you speak from a policy point of view? Christian.
That's a great question. And I'd like to just thank all the organizers for inviting me here tonight and for the other panelists, their work and insight here in helping make folks' lives better. I focus on the kind of what I mean by infrastructure of homelessness is the shelter system. And this is a relatively kind of recent infrastructure in New York City, developed since the early 1980s. And when we think about homelessness, what I liked about what some of Catarina was saying was I tried to approach it from a historical perspective. So sometimes people think about kind of causes of homelessness, and they think about kind of like a precipitating cause, like the loss of a job or drug use or the loss of an apartment, kind of a singular cause. And this view is limited in kind of a number of senses. And if you kind of take one example, if you plot out the unemployment rate in New York City against the number of people living in shelter since 1980, both of those, the unemployment rate goes up and down, but the number of people living in shelter kind of steadily moves upwards. This is to say that jobs is certainly important, but not the only contributing factor to homelessness by any means. So in my understanding, I see kind of a confluence of linked but distinct historical factors. And I think this is kind of an important aspect of what we're talking about here. You know, these factors including but not limited to racism in housing markets throughout the 20th century, suburbanization, redlining, and more recently what Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor called predatory inclusion, and that she illustrated in her book, Race for Profit. Others have alluded to kind of stagnating incomes alongside rising rents across all neighborhoods of New York City, things like welfare cutbacks since the 1970s, gentrification, austerity, particularly since the 1975 fiscal crisis, and things like the rollback of federal funding for public housing. And so this is all of this is added up to kind of a rise in social inequality and segregation, as well as kind of focus on homeless shelters in kind of periods of austerity as institutions that can solve homelessness as a problem. And I think we need to kind of look beyond homeless shelters. It's about kind of repairing some of these historical trajectories rather than kind of seeing homeless shelters as kind of a catch-all solution to all of these problems. So I think this kind of gives us some insight into kind of this recent infrastructure.
Thank you for that response. We're seeing, Cindy, we're going to come back to you in just a moment, but coming along or following up on what Christian has said, there have been questions about New York City's capacity for shelters, for food kitchens, for soup kitchens, and I guess an associated question with that would be, well, what is the city doing about affordable housing? Because Christian, you mentioned the racism and various sociological barriers to people being appropriately housed. What obligation, what resources does the city of New York have to offer? Yes, as shelters, as food, soup kitchens, but also moving people along out of the transient sort of category and into affordable housing. What does the city of New York have to offer? How is the city of New York taking the lead in that effort? So I'll throw that out to the panel. Cindy, I'm going to come back to you with a very specific question later. But would one of our panelists like Kristy or Charlee perhaps like to tackle that question regarding capacity or shelters or?
Yeah, as a former homeless person myself, I find that the city is failing us tremendously. And the aspects of the issues that are happening inside of the shelters. When I was in there, we didn't get things that we should have gotten. My goal right now is what I'm doing is I'm out in the street every day and I'm connected with a lot of shelters. But what I'm finding is that the needs, especially of PPE, these things aren't being recognized either. But there's another portion of the low income and poverty-stricken areas, such as the projects. These people are suffering just as well as the people that are in the shelter. And getting back to the people that live on the street, as you did mention, because there's a lot of people don't realize that you have documented and undocumented homelessness. So the ones that are on the street, these are undocumented. You have no idea of how many people are really out there. I'm out there, I see them, I know where the majority of them take cover. And a lot of these people you can't help, they gave up in society. The best way to help them, I think, just like you said, you call 311 and you try to help. We have brought in homeless people off of the street, and what has happened is you take them to a shelter and within 48 hours, they're back on the street. But again, to reiterate, I really feel that the government and the state is really, their report cards to me is an F, okay? With being in this shelter for 2 years, and I suffered myself. Thank you.
Charlee. Kristy, do you have a comment you'd like to make?
So, I mean, there's definitely a shortage of affordable housing, and that has, continues to contribute to the homeless crisis. However, at the Bowery, we have found collaboration with the city to be very helpful, especially during the pandemic. So we find that some of our continual partnerships with the city, as well as other private organizations, is extremely critical. I think more importantly, getting people informed of and connected to resources like home-based resources that allow people to stay home will be also very essential during this time.
You've raised some, the last three speakers have raised some very interesting issues. And what we're seeing is that homelessness is not a discrete phenomenon. A person can be working and homeless. A person can be living in some place and still be technically homeless. For instance, I'm the executive director of an organization that a couple of our residences are technically transitional housing in which people are supposed to stay for no longer than 2 years. I have people who've been there 11, 12 years. Why? Because it's very difficult to find housing in New York City. Add to that the fact that individuals who may have been on the street, if they even had a social base, you've been on the street, you're not able to maintain your bank account, you're not able to maintain some of the social markers that we might take for granted. And so then you sort of lose your social capital, if you will. And then there are individuals who perhaps became homeless because they lacked certain life or social skills. So it's a complex phenomenon. And I'd like to throw out to the panel, I'd like to ask the panel to begin to discuss the linkages between, say, homelessness and hunger and mental health and loss of employment, all those things. But while you're thinking about that, I'm going to go back to Cindy and your statement that we should not give, I don't know if you said we should not give, but your statement discouraging giving direct contributions to homeless people. I know that this is a controversial issue for many. My own personal position changes from day to day. So I'd like, Cindy, for you to share with us why you gave that advice.
Sure. The city had launched a campaign a few years back that said, give homeless the change, give homeless the change that they would need. And so while, if it's an individual's choice to go ahead and give, some monetary assistance to someone on the street, that's their option. We think that more collaborative efforts and more targeted efforts would help a larger group of people.
I understand. And just very practically speaking, if I have $5 to give, I can give it to one person and they might buy a meal, but I can give it to my program and we might be able to buy 3 meals. So your helpful dollars will go further if you can put them in a place where people are operating on economies of scale. So thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify that. Now I'm going to go back to the panel and ask you about the linkages between the different issues, because I know that for, so some of my clients have, some are people living with HIV, some are people living with substance abuse issues, and some are people living with mental health issues. And it's interesting that those issues are all intertwined. And those issues, many of those issues contribute to their state of being homeless. So I'd like to throw it out to the panel to talk about linkages that can be formed or precipitating linkages. In other words, the fact that being mentally ill and having no treatment could lead to homelessness, or the fact that substance abuse can very well lead to homelessness. Panelists?
Could I
Anyone?
jump in here? Yeah,
Please do.
what I was the point I was trying to make is that there are conditions that kind of precipitate some type of social displacement, and they're multifaceted and overlapping. I think that someone being in a homeless shelter and going through a program such as a job training program can help some of the individuals within homeless shelters, but it doesn't change kind of those existing social conditions outside. So it's hard to imagine homeless shelters as kind of, you can think of it as like a funneling, right, of all of these social overlapping real, absolutely real social problems and kind of channeling them into kind of a phenomenon called homelessness, right? And I think that's kind of what homeless shelters do. Kind of to the point about kind of some of the linkages and specifically something like drug use. I mean, people of all demographics and ages and incomes use drugs, but some folks are kind of more vulnerable to losing what they have as a result of their using drugs. So I think when we talk about kind of homelessness, we have to think about it in terms of these social inequalities.
Thanks, Christian. I'm going to jump in there with you for a second because you talked about those issues, and there's a question asking you to define redlining and give an example how it specifically impacted the metro area. I think this is in housing, but before you do that, as we talk about the racism that impacts homelessness, I want to share how about a quarter of a century ago, I was job hunting on Wall Street. I was living in Harlem and job hunting on Wall Street. I'm a Duke alum, I'm an AB Duke. And I had people not looking at that, but I had people saying, listen, if you want to come work for this company on Wall Street, you need to take that Harlem address off your resume. These were the sorts of barriers I encountered, and I was fully housed at the time. So one can only imagine that if your address is on the same street as a shelter, or if you have, I don't know, an unexplained absence of 90 days to 18 months on your resume, how these things could impact your employability and ultimately your domicile. But Christian, going back to you, because in my mind, this is all about pigeonholing, and redlining is another form of pigeonholing. So could you please define pigeonholing for those assembled here and give an example of how pigeonholing specifically impacted the metro area with respect to homelessness?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're right to say that there's some kind of, there may be some geographical stigma attached to where folks are coming from. Redlining was a program that came out of the New Deal, and it was a building program. So in order to kind of jumpstart the country's economy during the Great Depression, the federal government was kind of investing in housing construction programs. But it was also a suburbanization program. So a lot of the new building was being done in the suburbs. When folks were, the redlining aspect of it comes from a federal agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was insuring individual loans so that working class folks could maintain their homes at this time of economic uncertainty. So they would insure certain types of loans. This got transferred over into the Federal Housing Administration. So, but they wouldn't insure all loans. And so they created maps of geographical areas of where they would guarantee that folks wouldn't default on their loans. And this was to preserve the lenders more than anything, right? To free up more and more mortgage lending to keep the economy going, again, during this time of uncertainty. So they sent out people to kind of canvass areas and say, okay, there are certain areas where your investment will be secured. And certain areas where we won't take responsibility if people go into default. The areas that people that were not being insured were predominantly working class neighborhoods in the city, and specifically areas that had any Black families living in them would not be graded. So there was a series of grades, A, B, C, and D, and the D grades were marked in with red lines in the map. This is where redlining comes in, and it was saying we won't guarantee investment in these areas. And if there were Black families living in the neighborhood, that almost guaranteed that it would be a D area. And there were other kind of classifications that went, other factors that went into this classification. But this clearly had an impact on the way that cities developed over the course of the 20th century. Most kind of importantly, this suburbanization, so a lot of the A areas, the green areas, were in the suburbs, and this suburbanization kind of leads to a declining tax base in the city, and kind of leads up to what we call kind of what came to be known as the urban crisis of the 1960s and 1970s. And some of those areas that we see, the redlined areas, are like East Harlem, Central Brooklyn, the South Bronx, and you can kind of create maps that show this active disinvestment and what it means for today.
Thank you. That is a fascinating explanation of a pervasive ill that has sort of been a plague upon our society. I think it also sort of points to the fact that many times people look at people who are homeless, people who have mental illness, people who have substance use disorder, and they implicitly or explicitly make this sort of assumption that the individual is in that state due to some lack or failing of that person, when in reality, we live in a very complex, a very sort of interactive, interrelated society that has not historically treated everyone equally. When you are among the groups who are not treated equally, your reactions may be a bit different. And so we find people living and responding and reacting in ways that are not always immediately understandable. I say all that because there are a myriad of factors impacting homelessness. And I'd like to ask each of our panelists now to chime in and talk about how their specific area of expertise, Catarina, for instance, what's the interaction between food insecurity and homelessness, and how are these issues sort of addressed? And Kristy, have the clients in the Bowery mission remained, has their number remained fairly constant, or have they grown? Charlee, we would certainly like to hear from you about a bit more about your experience as a person experiencing homelessness. How did that impact your sense of self? How did you get the drive and determination to say, I'm going to get through this? Cindy, you could speak a bit, if you would, about the city's response, a bit more if you'd like to, about the city's response. Christian, I think we've covered you. I'd like to remind us all that we have about 15 minutes left. And to the audience, I'd like to ask you to share the chat, use the chat function to share your reactions. You could also share, if the audience has volunteer experiences related to homelessness or hunger, please feel free to use the chat to share that. And last but not least, please use that chat function to ask questions. So Catarina, can you talk to us a little bit more about that intersection, of homelessness and hunger, and how one condition impacts the other, and how they're symbiotically linked?
I will speak just a bit because I want to make sure I yield time to the other panelists, but it's very, very important for City Harvest to dispel the myth that only homeless people are food insecure. We have so many people in our city that are hard workers, that are perhaps doubled up in housing. For example, I hear about a lot of families, Latino families in Washington Heights and Inwood, who are renting a room where we have many family members in one room. So technically, they have housing, but it's not an ideal situation. It's not a situation where sometimes people don't have access to a kitchen, or the kitchen is shared. So the reality is that, like everyone has been talking about, there are a lot of complex situations, structural racism and inequality that impact people. And when you are in a system that's difficult to navigate, for example, an immigrant, language barriers, trying to access services. Now, people are afraid to access services as undocumented people because of the way that policies have come down related to public charge rule. And that's something that we're, as an organization, City Harvest, is really focused as well on advocacy and activating our agencies and our community to talk and speak up against harmful policies and advocate for policies that will protect the safety net and help people, because as we know, the safety net has really been threatened, and people are actively living in fear, many of our community members. So I'll stop there, but the relationships are very complex, and there's a lot going on.
Thank you, Catarina. Thank you for minding the time. If we could ask each panelist to limit themselves to 2 minutes, that would be really helpful. Cindy, would you like to respond next?
Sure. I would just like to say that homelessness is not a one mold for everyone. There are different circumstances that bring people into our homeless shelters or are homeless in general. A lot of my colleagues here on the panel have alluded to that. But I would like to say that at DHS, we do our very best, and we're committed to meeting clients where they're at, right? Their circumstances, what brings them here, and we individualize and tailor a plan on how to best assist them. There are many, many challenges when people come into shelter, whether it's families with children, adult families, or single adults. There is a lot of mental health. There are substance use issues. There's medical issues. There are individuals who are coming in because their families have abandoned them, domestic violence. There are clients that may not be appropriate for other settings. A lot of the state hospitals have closed down. That funding has reduced. There is underemployment. There is a huge lack of affordable housing. So all of these different circumstances bring our clients in, and we try and do our very best, and our not-for-profit providers who work with us, who contract with the shelters, meeting clients where they're at, treating everybody with dignity and respect, allowing people the opportunity to get back on their feet and acclimate themselves back into self-sufficiency in the communities where they'd like to be. Sometimes it's a short process, depending where they are. As another panelist mentioned, like there's undocumented clients who may not have all of the documentation in place to move forward. It may take a little bit longer, but we don't give up hope on anyone. We work with everyone. We do the best we can. Some people stay in our facilities a little longer than others, but New York City is a right to shelter. Anyone who comes to our shelters, we have to provide shelter to them. And so whether it's a family who's working and have suddenly lost their jobs, or have been evicted because a landlord did not pay their rent and are in our system, could be a very, very different profile and look in terms of services provided than someone who might be coming from being incarcerated. So it is a complex issue, but it is also a very individualized issue. And I would like, if anything else, for people to walk away with knowing that.
Thank you. As you were, I'm going to ask Kristy to chime in next. And while she's preparing herself, I'm just going to say that, Cindy, as you were calling out that litany of people who are affected by homelessness, I realize that you manage adult services at DHS, but as you were speaking, I could not help but think of teenagers who are abandoned by their families, particularly teenagers who are kicked out of their families because of religious convictions. That's a big one for me, but religion and sexuality and abandoning your children is a tremendous source of homelessness before people are full-grown adults. So I just wanted to throw that in. I'm gonna move on to Kristy now because we have less than 10 minutes.
At DHS, we actually partner with Project Renewal, who has a LGBTQI facility for young individuals 30 and under. We also have specialized shelters within our portfolios for young adults between 18 to 24, Turning Point and Create Young. So we do our best to try to have some specialized shelters to meet the needs of those vulnerable individuals, as well as we've really embarked. We're an aging population with DHS and our clients. Our clients are getting older. And so we have specific programming for clients who are 50 and over, where there's a different set of needs. A lot of the clients who are really aging suffer now with onset of dementia and Alzheimer's and have more mobility issues, psychiatric and medical conditions. And DHS is committed to work with our nonprofit providers to help assist these clients along the way.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
You're welcome.
As we move to Kristy, and we're looking at the challenges of caring for the various homeless populations, I'm just going to add that as we look at seniors, as you're out there trying to be a provider of homeless services and you're looking at buildings, there's so many buildings now that are old New York City buildings that are no longer ADA, that are not ADA compliant, that could be used as shelters, but you know what? You can't get a walker up those stairs. You can't get a wheelchair up those steps. So having discussed these issues that beset those of us who work with the city of New York, I know this doesn't exclude you, Kristy, but I'm going to ask you now to share your comments, please.
Sure. So for New Yorkers experiencing homelessness, COVID-19 has been especially dangerous, and the current need is urgent and critical. Those living unsheltered already experience higher rates of chronic disease like diabetes, hypertension, mental illness, substance abuse, and trauma. And these conditions inherently increase vulnerability to illness, particularly when they're combined. So it's in light of the citywide restrictions designed to prevent further spread of disease, homeless New Yorkers no longer have access to hygiene facilities, safe shelter of good food supplies, in a time when these basic necessities are needed more than ever. So they cannot do the mandates or follow mandates to stock up and stay at home or work from home, simply because they do not have a home. And so within the Bowery mission, we have stood by New Yorkers through various disasters and continue to provide emergency meals, hygiene care, and at two of our locations, specifically the Bowery campus and our Lafayette Street, we focus on those emergency kind of shelter needs. We also provide residential programs which last between 3 and 15 months, where we provide adults with housing, community living, and relational case management as they make progress towards their goals of overcoming homelessness. So services that are provided in those residential programs include clinical counseling, addiction recovery to soft skills training, vocational training, and job and housing placement. And those programs currently have house 52 women and about 118 men. I didn't have a chance to answer the question about volunteers and how volunteers can get involved. We have more than 17,000 volunteers who support every aspect of our organization's on-the-ground operations. And so volunteers can contribute in many ways, like serving meals, tutoring, and mentoring clients, as well as offering special or professional skills and more. So if there are individuals who are interested in packing to-go meals, sorting goods, disinfecting facilities, and distributing meals, all all of that information is available on our website at bowery.org and how you can get involved in those things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Charlee, could you please take a couple of minutes and just share with us your experience as a person who has experienced homelessness? Share with us your experiences. We're talking about all these solutions and all these resources. What was your actual lived experience? What was that like? How effective were these?
Right. Let me tell you something. That was it's most terrifying thing to realize that you've become homeless because of a situation, and there's a lot of us in there from depending on whether you lost a job or a tragedy that they couldn't function after, a death, or some people just don't make enough money for that. But what happened to me was I realized that once I got a hold of myself, I refused to allow myself to break down and to cry, because I knew the minute that I cave into that I wouldn't be able to stand and support myself and be a voice for others. So what I did was the rise of broken women was incepted while I was in the shelter. So it was born there, and then I progressed by taking the knowledge and the experience that I experienced while I was in there to be a voice for others. I mean, I've done the thing where people say that, that will never, I will never do that. I've eaten out of garbage cans. I've stood in front of these Chinese stores and waited for them, to come out with them doggy bags, and, and they'll throw them in the garbage can. I'll go like, okay, that's lunch, that's dinner, until I was able to get on my feet. And the first 3 days of my homelessness was on the A train. So that was my bedroom. That was my, that was my, my shelter until I could put myself into an institution. But the thing is, I just wanted to share with this real quick, because I can just go on and on with this, because this is, I just feel so good about what I'm doing, helping the women. It's basically with helping with women with menstrual hygiene products. The necessary thing of a bra and underwear, and it just goes on, and makeup. Even though you're in a shelter, you definitely want to look good. So all of these things is what the Rise of Broken Women does do for the women, for the people in the shelter. And my phone rings off the hook. I didn't shut down, because periods don't stop because of the pandemic. The city hall has, the mayor's office has donated us 45,000 masks. So I was been on the street and also giving them inside of the shelter. But the thing is, I'm proud that I didn't become institutionalized. And what I do is I try to talk to the other women not to get institutionalized, because you're in a position where you can't help yourself. You give up the fight, but you got to keep that fight. And I don't want to over talk my time, because we got 2 minutes, and I hope I hit everything that you wanted me to speak about. If there's any questions, please don't hesitate, ask me, and I can tell you much more.
Thank you. We've gotten a bit of a reprieve, but I want to kind of bring this to an ending. It has been said that most Americans are one paycheck away from homelessness. I don't know what everybody else's finances are like. I'm approaching retirement, so that doesn't really apply for me. But New York is a very expensive city to live in. And most of the people who are here, it's been my experience over the last 30 plus years, most of the people here are really struggling. If you find yourself in a situation, a domestic violence situation, a crazy roommate situation, an unanticipated medical situation. I heard somebody recently just whining and complaining because there was a big medical bill coming up, and the first thought was, oh my God, I've never been homeless before. but I have to pay this medical bill. I can't pay this medical bill in my rent. So there are a myriad of factors contributing to homelessness. People who never thought they would be without a job or finding themselves, or a home, or finding themselves on the street. And now we're in the midst of a global pandemic. We who are fortunate enough to have enough resources to meet our needs and perhaps a little extra, what can we do? How can we help? Particularly, you know, there have often been community soup kitchens. I live across the street from a church. There's usually a community soup kitchen right there. One of the things, I can't remember the organization's name, so I won't call it, but there's often coat drives in New York City to give coats for the homeless. But now with COVID-19, these activities that depend so much on personal interaction have been stopped. So what can people do now? I'm going to ask each of you to take about 30 to 45 seconds to go around and speak to how can people contribute to your organization's mission? We'll go in this order: Catarina, Cindy, Kristy, Christian, Charlee, and did I miss anybody? No, that's all of them. Okay, Catarina, would you start? And there's like 45 seconds. What can people do?
Okay, so I'll try to go over it quickly, but City Harvest has been incredibly active since the pandemic started, and the work has not stopped. Our warehouse has never shut down. So we have actually ramped up our operation significantly in order to help meet this overwhelming need for emergency food that we're seeing across the city. So since March, we've rescued and delivered more than 67 million pounds of food, which is an 89% increase over the same time last year. Many of our partners did shut down because of the pandemic, and they had a loss of volunteers. A lot of our soup kitchens and food pantries rely more on an older population, retirees to volunteers, and people were very concerned about their safety. But so prior to the pandemic, we had about 400 partners. Many were shut down as a precautionary measure, but 1/3 was shut down. But we really worked to help. To help, we sent more food to the agencies that were open so that they could feed everybody coming to them for help, because less places were available, so the lines were longer at the ones that were open. We partnered with various community organizations to open new emergency food distribution sites. So we opened 32 new sites in high-need neighborhoods, and we sent PPE and equipment like forklifts, pallet jacks, whatever the agencies were asking us for, we were helping so they could reopen safely. And I personally have worked on a project that has helped recruit over 13,000 volunteers for agencies during this time. We have partnered with Lemon Tree, New York Cares, our own volunteer base, and social media and mutual aid groups, which have been very active across the city. We also started repacking our food into bags so that it's really easy for the agencies to pass that out. So now only 50 agencies in our network are closed. So you can volunteer. Many people are not familiar with their local pantries or their soup kitchen. And I would really encourage you to open yourself up to volunteering. The people that run the pantries need to help, and they're trying to do everything. Yeah.
Catarina, thank you so much. I'm gonna cut you off. We've got 2 minutes left. People can volunteer to Food for Survival. Yes. City Harvest?
Yes, and I put in the chat. In the chat ways to help City Harvest. Awesome. Everything's on our website.
Awesome. We have 1 minute left. Cindy, how can people help the city of New York?
I'll do it really quick. You can go to our website, www.nyc.gov/DHS. It will give you a list of all of our not-for-profit providers, as well as information to contact our intergovernmental affairs and community affairs offices to show how you can assist with volunteering or donating. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kristy, in less than a minute, actually you've told us already. Do you want to share again how people can help?
I wanted to add, similarly, the Bowery mission is privately funded, so you can always go online, and donations are greatly encouraged, and we are blessed by them, as well as being able to volunteer online.
Awesome, thank you. Charlee, how can people help the Rise of Broken Women?
Yes, simply just go to riseofbrokenwomen.org, and you could see where you can, donate money, clothes, makeup, and we have right now coat drive going on. So all of these things will be found on our website. And I just want to thank you so much for the privilege of being part of this awesome panelists.
Oh, we're not. Thank you for being here. We're not over yet. We are out of time. Christian, we are not ignoring you, but do you want to take 2 seconds and talk about what people can do to help your academic exploits at Barnard? Or how people can, or you have?
Yeah, not my personal exploits, but if there's a tenants organization in your neighborhood, join it. You know, if there's an anti-gentrification group in your neighborhood, join it. Environmental justice group, a food justice, urban agriculture group, so a labor organization. All of these groups are working towards organizing against kind of the problems that end up in folks being displaced from their neighborhoods.
Thank you. I want to just take a moment to thank all of our panelists for bringing their incredible wealths of knowledge and expertise to this conversation. I don't believe this will be the last conversation, but right now we are going to end this panel. I am going to turn it over to Aruna Inal-Singh, who is going to lead us into our breakout rooms. So at this time, won't you welcome Aruna?
Cassandra, thank you so much. I mean, I think each of those panelists we could have spent an hour on. So,
exactly.
So a very, very great thank you to Catarina, to Kristy, to Christian, to Cindy, to Charlie, and Cassandra, you did a terrific job of moderating all this information and trying to keep it balanced. We'll just do a little wrap up. Jack, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, first off, thank you to all of our panelists again, and our moderator, Cassandra. I mean, I was really moved by your words and your enthusiasm and the great work that you do every day. And you're an inspiration to all of us and to all of the people who joined us for this event. There's so many things we wanted to learn, but the most important thing we wanted to learn is learn the best way for us to help people in need in a city that we all love very much. And it's really up to us to make it better. And just thank you all for being part of the solution, and go forward. Thank you.
That's awesome, Jack. I wanted to add a few things. Also, it does take a village, as we all know, to put something together that might seem so seamless, but there was a lot of behind the work going on. So also special thanks to DAA. We have both Sterling and Michael here tonight. Sterling, our alumni president, and Michael, our alumni president, and Sterling, president of DAA. We had a wonderful support of the DukeNY board, so thanks very much to them, to Erica Gavin and Madeline Drury, who behind the scenes orchestrated all our back end Zooming, our seamless Zooming. Wonderful DA New York City committee. So special thanks to Anya, who kicked us off, Janae, who did the Q&A, Gwen, who also did a little bit of behind the scenes technology, and Jack, to you, executive producer and director. Thanks.
And Aruna, of course, for her great work as always.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was a great team, really a great team. Thank you all.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining us. If you guys need anything at all, we are all found on the alumni.duke.edu website. Please send us your questions and comments. We'll try to respond to everything as much as we can. All right.